Hey everybody, it's Tom Woods, July 10th, 2012. Not too long ago, there was somebody on Twitter who was saying some unkind things about Ron Paul, and as I sometimes do, I allowed myself to get dragged into this, and I started listing some of the reasons somebody might respect Ron Paul. Even if you might not vote for him, you might still at least respect him, and I was listing some of these things, and I said, for one thing, how many congressmen have actually read Ludwig von Mises and understand what he said about business cycles and can apply this to the present and actually predict what's going to happen and predict the financial crisis? And then after I posted that, then I said, wait a minute, have you even heard of Ludwig von Mises? And this young kid basically hadn't. And of course, my first instinct was pounce. This goes to show the ignorance of the other side. But, this is a personal failing of mine. I got to stop doing that. It's not this kid's fault that he's part of a conservative movement that has absolutely no interest in educating him about who Ludwig von Mises was. I mean, Mises in the old days, National Review would publish Mises. Like, Bill Buckley admired and at least knew something about Mises. Today, it's like, well, he's just the preserve of the Ron Paul people, if anybody has even heard of him. That just goes to show the total corruption of the so-called conservative movement. That's not this kid's fault. So instead of bashing him over the head about, well, you're a stupid idiot, and how could you not know the greatest economist who ever lived, basically, I thought, you know what, no, I'm going to post some resources about Mises. And so, in fact, what I'm doing is I'm making this video specifically for him. So why should you be interested in Mises? Why should you respect Mises? Well, just a few things. Apart from his technical economic contributions, let's bear in mind that in his famous 1920 article about economic calculation in the Socialist Commonwealth, already in 1920, Mises had shown theoretically why socialism was impossible. And it wasn't the usual explanation, well, under socialism, nobody will have an incentive to do undesirable jobs because everybody will get the same pay or whatever. Wasn't that sort of typical stuff? It wasn't the socialist planner won't have enough knowledge, he won't have all these nooks and crannies of dispersed information at his disposal. It's not even if he had all the information at his disposal, he would not be able to calculate, he wouldn't be able to allocate resources in a non-arbitrary way. He wouldn't be able to calculate his costs and to know whether he's employing resources in the way that's the most economic. That he isn't taking resources from an area that's more valued, where those resources would produce more value, and putting them into an avenue where they would produce less value. He has no way of knowing that, because there are no prices of these goods. There are no prices of capital goods in a socialist commonwealth, because the state owns all the capital goods. And how do you get prices? Through buying and selling. But if the state already owns all the capital goods, what are they going to buy and sell the things to themselves? There is no buying and selling if there's only one owner. And so there can be no prices. There can therefore be no profit and loss calculation, and so the central planning board of a socialist society is totally in the dark by the very nature of the case. So socialism has to destroy civilization. Now you could grope along a little bit, you could manage to get by here and there if you could refer to capitalist prices on a world market, if you could look at the Sears catalog, or you could look at what the prices are elsewhere in the free market economies. But if the whole world went socialist, you would revert to barbarism in fairly short order. Well, this is a huge breakthrough, theoretically, by Mises. This is the sort of thing that in a just society, you would, in years to come, you would earn the Nobel Prize for that. Also, it was Mises who, in 1912, when he was 31 years old, he writes The Theory of Money and Credit, and he explains that the boom-bust cycle that we see in modern economies, where people are doing great, then badly, and great, then badly, this is not a naturally occurring phenomenon, as the Marxists insisted that it was, and really as all schools seem to insist that it is, except for the Austrian free market school that Mises belonged to. He said that no, it's intervention into the economy that gives you these problems. You would have business fluctuations. Yes, some businesses do well, some fail because they don't anticipate consumer demand well enough or whatever. Or it could be that every 7 years there's a particular product that really has its day, and then for the next 6 years you don't need that product because every 7th year you get locusts, and so you need the locust battling product. Okay, we understand why that goes up and down. But why would the whole economy go up and down? Mises explains this in terms of interventions into the economy, and particularly in the form of when the central bank intervenes in the economy to lower interest rates artificially. This sets in motion an unsustainable chain of events, an unsustainable configuration of the economy that cannot go on forever, and ultimately it yields you a crash. Now, obviously, you have to go into more detail about that, and I'll have a page at the end of this video that will link you to a brief exposition of Mises' theory of the business cycle. And in fact, the year after Mises died, so Mises died in 1973, 1974, Hayek wins the Nobel Prize for his elaborations on this theory. This is very important for defenders of the free market economy. Even conservatives who are supposed to believe in the free market economy these days don't even know about this theory, even though it helps to explain the current financial disaster better than any competing theory, and it was people who subscribed to this theory who disproportionately predicted that the collapse was coming. Also, we have the great moral example of Mises. Here he was, a Jewish man living in Nazi-dominated Europe and teaching the opposite of the Nazi economic philosophies, teaching about the international division of labor, laissez-faire, the unhampered market economy. The unhampered market economy is not exactly what Hitler believed in. Hitler wanted a third way in between what he believed to be Jewish Bolshevism and Jewish capitalism. So this is not a particularly hospitable place for a guy like Mises, and ultimately he had to flee Europe just ahead of Nazi armies. His papers and books were seized in Austria. So finally he makes it to the United States almost empty-handed in 1940 without a paid academic position, even though he was leagues above his contemporaries in terms of his knowledge of economics, history, philosophy. And yet he carried on, despite the fact that if he had just compromised and just become a social democrat, it would have made his professional life a million times easier at a time when you could count the number of free market economists on one hand. And yet he carried on. He wrote best-selling academic works, 900-page treatise Human Action, published by Yale in 1949, not to mention his books Omnipotent Government, Bureaucracy, Theory and History, books on the epistemology of economics. And he did all this stuff all to his dying day without ever compromising. He just stood up for what was right. Now, how many people can we say do that today? Well, I think now we can understand why Ron Paul found such a model in Ludwig von Mises. Talk about the guy who stands up against the whole world. This is somebody you should know about, both for his scholarly contributions and for the example he gives us of a life well lived. To learn more about Ludwig von Mises, check out the resources that I've assembled to accompany this video over at libertyclassroom.com/Mises, lowercase m, M-I-S-E-S, libertyclassroom.com/Mises. Check it out. Thanks for listening.